dips are different, despite appearing along the continuum of viscous.
For nearly 2 decades, Alton Brown was the backbone of Food Network, the man who made food television feel intelligent, the man who made millions of Americans care about the science behind a sear, the chemistry behind a cake. Then one day, the network moved on, and so did he. But here is what nobody talked about. Alton Brown did not just leave Food Network. Food Network lost him. And the story of how that happened is messier, sharper, and far more revealing than anyone on either side has ever admitted. The man who rewrote food television. Here is something most people do not know about Alton Brown. Long before he ever touched a frying pan on camera, he spent his days operating one from behind the lens. Alton Brown was never a traditional chef who happened to stumble into television. Rather, he was a trained filmmaker who deliberately walked toward food with a camera in hand. That distinction matters immensely because it explains why his legendary show felt so different and sheds light on why the very network he helped build would eventually struggle to keep up with his vision. To understand how this unique perspective formed, you have to go back to his childhood in Georgia. Growing up with a father who ran a small radio station and a grandfather who owned a restaurant, media and food were woven into the very fabric of his daily life, long before they became formal career paths. After studying at the University of Georgia, he spent years working in film and television production around Atlanta, writing, directing, and mastering the mechanics of storytelling on screen. He was highly successful at it, yet a nagging question kept interrupting his work. Why was food television so incredibly bad? It wasn't bad in the sense that it was unwatchable, but rather that it was incredibly lazy. Every cooking show followed the exact same predictable formula, where a host stood behind a sterile counter, cooked a dish, smiled for the camera, and plated the food just as the credits rolled. Nobody ever paused to explain why an onion caramelizes, nor did they bother to tell you what was actually happening chemically inside the pan, offering viewers endless instructions without an ounce of true understanding. Determined to fix this flaw, Brown enrolled at the New England Culinary Institute in 1997. He went in with no desire to become a line chef in a restaurant. Instead, his goal was to master the language of food well enough to teach it effectively on screen. Armed with his training, he returned to Atlanta with a fully realized concept called Good Eats.
Render moisture quite as willingly as when they aren't brined. Also, the brine season.
The pitch was remarkably simple on paper. A cooking show that treated its audience like intelligent adults by breaking down the food science behind every technique through props, bizarre experiments, and real chemistry. Surprisingly, Food Network passed on the idea the first time around. It actually took Food Network Canada airing the pilot to generate enough buzz to convince the American network to take a second look. When Good Eats finally premiered in the United States in July of 1999, the response was immediate. Audiences connected with Brown not because he was the most technically gifted chef on television, but because he made them feel smart for watching, transforming cooking into a science you could actually understand rather than a routine you merely imitated. By blending sketch comedy, puppets, and chalkboard diagrams, he explained complex ideas like the Maillard reaction, the chemical process that browns meat and develops flavor, with the clarity of an exceptional teacher. This dynamic format was completely alien to anything else on the network, and by the mid-2000s, the show became a massive hit that anchored the channel's cultural credibility. Alton Brown quickly became the authoritative face that Food Network leaned on when they wanted to be taken seriously, leading him to host major hits like Iron Chef America and Feasting on Asphalt. Yet through his rapid rise, he maintained a rare, fiercely independent point of view. He was never afraid to share his blunt opinions about food and television, a quality that made him magnetic to viewers, but increasingly difficult for a corporate network to manage. Because at his core, Alton Brown was never just on-screen talent. He was a profound thinker, and he was about to notice a massive shift in media that would change everything. The reason behind the smile. Nobody cancels a hit show without a solid reason. And when Food Network canceled Good Eats in 2012, after 14 seasons and nearly 250 episodes, they chose not to give a dramatic explanation. There was no messy public falling out, no tense press conference, and certainly no official statement from Alton Brown, standing at a podium to explain his side of the story. Instead, the legendary series just quietly ended. Yet, the true story behind that sudden cancellation had been slowly building for years, and to fully understand it, you have to look closely at what was happening deep inside Food Network long before the axe actually came down. To see the shift, you have to look back at the early 2000s for a moment. When Good Eats first aired, Food Network was still actively figuring out its identity. Having launched in 1993 with a straightforward premise focused on basic cooking shows, professional chefs teaching, and food as the central subject matter, rather than a flashy spectacle. That original version of Food Network gave the television world Julia Child reruns, calm instructional programming, and educational shows like Good Eats that treated the home kitchen as a wonderful place of learning. Eventually, the network ratings started telling a vastly different story, as competition formats began pulling much bigger numbers. Reality shows built around intense personal drama, dramatic elimination, and high-pressure situations were completely outperforming everything educational on the schedule. Food Network executives looked at those shifting numbers and made the exact decision that large media corporations always make when the data starts talking. They followed the money. By the mid-2000s, the network was pivoting hard toward reality television, leaning heavily into interpersonal conflict, rapid pacing, and oversized personalities. The kitchen stopped functioning as a classroom and started operating as an arena. Chopped premiered to massive success in 2009, followed closely by Cupcake Wars, Worst Cooks in America, and Guy Fieri's Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, which quickly became one of the highest-rated shows the network had ever produced in its history.
Spicy?
Ryan, you okay over there?
What did you just bite,
You okay?
Ryan? Was that a...
While none of that is inherently bad television, and some of it is genuinely entertaining, it meant something drastic for a show like Good Eats. It meant that a slow, methodical, science-driven cooking program was suddenly sitting in a daily schedule built entirely around speed rounds and dramatic eliminations. It meant that Alton Brown's core philosophy, which favored patience, explanation, and deep understanding over simple instruction, was running directly against the corporate direction the network had chosen. Ultimately, Good Eats was not canceled because it failed. It was canceled because it no longer fit the brand. Alton Brown saw this shift in real time, and he was never naive about what it meant for the industry. In media interviews from that specific period, he was already using sharp language that made the internal network tension crystal clear, even going so far as to describe modern food television as becoming stupid. He chose that word specifically because he felt the content was not just simplified or dumbed down, but actively stupid, which was an incredibly strong word for an individual who was still under contract with the very network he was openly criticizing. However, Alton Brown had never been the kind of person who softened his sharp opinions just to protect a comfortable business relationship. That raw honesty was a massive part of what made him so compelling on screen, but it was increasingly becoming a major corporate complication of it. While he stayed at Food Network to host Cutthroat Kitchen when it premiered in 2013, alongside various other competition formats, something fundamental had shifted, and people close to the situation could feel the underlying coldness.
Give it. $4,500.
$4,500 chef Dean says 46.
$6,000.
If he disagreed so strongly with this new direction, why did he choose to stay for so long? The answer is not simple, but it largely comes down to the fact that Food Network was still the biggest platform in food media, and walking away meant abandoning the massive audience he had spent over a decade building. In 2012, YouTube was not yet the powerhouse alternative it would become. Podcasting was still in its early years, and the digital infrastructure for an independent creator to exist comfortably outside a major cable network was not yet fully built. So, he stayed, he adapted, and he hosted shows that were not entirely his own creative vision. He kept one foot inside the corporate machine, while his other foot was already pointed toward the door. That quiet tension would not stay peaceful for long, because Alton Brown possessed a habit that media corporations find deeply inconvenient. He talked. He gave revealing interviews, appeared on independent podcasts, and posted online. And in those unedited spaces, he started saying exactly what he thought about the decline of food television. That is where things got genuinely complicated. Next, we look at the specific interviews that raised executives' eyebrows, the blunt quotes that could never be walked back, and the exact moment Alton Brown stopped being a network asset and became a corporate problem. The things he said, out loud. Most people who work in television learn one universal rule very early in their careers: do not bite the hand that feeds you. Alton Brown either never learned that rule, or he decided it simply did not apply to him. And what he chose to say publicly about Food Network over the years was certainly not the kind of praise network executives would frame and hang on their office walls. It was pointed, specific, and it always landed directly where it was intended. This public criticism did not start with one explosive interview, but built up gradually, much like pressure inside a sealed container, until 2010, when, 2 years before Good Eats was canceled, Brown openly stated that food television had become dominated by big personalities rather than actual culinary craft, arguing that the focus had shifted away from teaching people anything real about food. He added that what passed for mainstream food television had become, in his words, a lot of schmaltz, making it entirely obvious that he was criticizing the exact network he worked for. Then came the comment that was repeated across the media landscape when, asked about programs built around celebrity chefs with no formal training but maximum screen charisma, Brown famously labeled them food porn, explaining that these shows were designed purely for visual and emotional stimulation, with zero educational value. That phrase traveled fast, getting quoted in major print publications and circulating widely online, which ultimately put Food Network in an awkward position, because the man delivering the critique was still one of their most recognizable faces. For a while, executives did nothing because Brown was still drawing a massive audience, meaning the network simply absorbed the public embarrassment and kept moving forward, but the blunt comments just kept coming. In 2013, the same year Cutthroat Kitchen premiered, Brown gave an interview where he described the entire genre of competition cooking formats as being built around manufactured stress rather than genuine culinary skill, acknowledging that he hosted one himself, while making it clear that he understood the massive difference between what made good television and what made good food. While that is a careful, highly intelligent position, it is also a quietly devastating one for an employer, as he was essentially telling the audience he knew his own show was not what he believed in most. Most television talent at his level had publicists whose entire job was to prevent these statements, but Brown refused to stay on message, delivering his critique consistently across nearly a decade by targeting celebrity chefs who could not cook, a media industry that rewarded fame over knowledge, and a television culture that turned audiences into passive consumers of spectacle rather than active learners. Every single one of those criticisms landed squarely on his own employer's strategy.
Least amount of heat on the plate.
No.
No
She
way.
got the hair iron, which explains why
When the Good Eats revival finally happened in 2019, 7 years after the original run ended, it aired on the Cooking Channel rather than the flagship network, confirming what the previous years suggested. The relationship between Alton Brown and Food Network had moved from a true creative partnership into something much cooler, more transactional, and far more careful on both sides, leaving him in the building but no longer at the center of it. The exit, the silence, and what he built instead. At some point, a man stops trying to change an institution and starts building his own. For Alton Brown, that turning point came quietly, without a dramatic resignation letter or a public statement drawing a line in the sand. Instead, it was a gradual, deliberate shift in where he chose to invest his immense creative energy. What he ultimately built, completely outside the walls of Food Network, turned out to be far more fascinating than anything corporate executives would ever have allowed him to do inside the company. To understand this transition, it helps to establish exactly what his final years inside the cable network looked like. After Good Eats wrapped its original run in 2012, Alton Brown's presence on the channel changed shape entirely. And though he remained on screen, the work was fundamentally different. He hosted Cutthroat Kitchen from 2013 to 2017, performing beautifully across 4 seasons, the way a highly skilled professional can excel at any job they could easily complete in their sleep. However, if you watch those old episodes back and compare them directly to Good Eats, the difference is far from subtle. On his original show, Brown was the primary architect of every single segment, writing the script, shaping the narrative, and carefully controlling the educational logic that ran beneath every quirky joke and kitchen experiment. On Cutthroat Kitchen, he was reduced to a presenter, A remarkably good one, certainly, but a presenter nonetheless. The nature of the job had changed completely, but the man doing it had not.
There's the simple criteria.
Yes.
There's got to be a breaded
Breaded
piece of
cutlet.
chicken.
Yeah.
There's got to be tomato sauce.
By 2017, Cutthroat Kitchen had ended, and with it went the very last regular television vehicle that Food Network had built around Alton Brown specifically. While he did not vanish from television screens entirely, appearing occasionally on various network specials and staying nominally connected to the brand, the professional relationship had thinned out to the point where calling it a true partnership would be overly generous. Remarkably, something entirely different was happening on the other side of that equation at the exact same time, as Alton Brown had quietly started touring the country. It wasn't in the way a traditional musician tours exactly, but it was incredibly close. He developed an elaborate live variety show titled Alton Brown Live, the Edible Inevitable Tour, touring the United States to perform in sold-out theaters.
Hi, food fans. Alton Brown here. Just want to point out,
He brought his signature brand of food science to live audiences the exact same way Good Eats had once brought it to television viewers, except now there was absolutely no network standing between him and the people sitting in the auditorium seats. There were no corporate executives dictating the format, no schedulers moving his time slot around, and no network programming strategy to navigate. There was just him, a stage, and an enthusiastic audience that showed up because they specifically wanted exactly what he was offering. The massive success of these live tours taught him an incredibly valuable lesson. The dedicated audience he had meticulously built over 14 seasons of Good Eats was still very much alive and well. They had not moved on to other things. They had simply been waiting patiently for him to give them a brand new place to go. So, he just kept right on building. He launched an independent podcast, expanded his digital presence, and became deeply engaged in the kind of direct audience relationship that traditional cable television structurally cannot offer. Someone watching an episode of Good Eats on cable television in 2005 had absolutely no mechanism to talk back, ask a quick follow-up question, or feel like an active participant rather than a passive viewer. Alton Brown's independent digital platforms changed that dynamic completely, and he took to the new media environment incredibly naturally because the exact instinct that made Good Eats work, the sincere desire to truly connect with the individual person sitting on the other side of the screen, was the exact same instinct driving everything he was building independently. The network simply stopped being a place where what he did best had any room to exist. And Alton Brown, being the independent thinker he is, did not wait around hoping that reality would change. He simply left the building and took his massive audience along with him. What Alton Brown leaving actually means. Food Network did not collapse when Alton Brown left, and let us be completely honest about that fact up front. The network kept running, the shows kept airing, Guy Fieri kept driving across America eating triple-stacked burgers, and Chopped kept eliminating contestants on a strict, high-pressure timer. The television ratings stayed perfectly healthy, and the massive corporate machine never truly stopped grinding forward. But something fundamental changed. If you watched Food Network regularly before and after Brown's presence faded from the lineup, you felt it deeply, even if you could not immediately find the exact words to name the shift. The network lost its argument. Every media brand, whether its executives realize it or not, is constantly making a silent argument about what it values. In its early years, Food Network argued that food was worth taking seriously, that the kitchen was a place of genuine craft and intelligence, and that a home cook deserved to understand exactly why things worked, rather than blindly following a rigid set of steps. Alton Brown was the absolute purest expression of that argument. He was not just another show on the schedule. He was the primary reason the entire educational argument held together. When Good Eats wrapped its original run and his presence thinned, the network quietly stopped making that intellectual argument. It was replaced by a completely different one. Food is entertainment, food is competition, and food is big personality. All of those things can be true simultaneously, but none of them is the same thing as what Food Network once stood for. Audiences noticed, maybe they did not notice all at once, and maybe not loudly, but the comment sections on old video clips tell the story clearly enough. People were not just nostalgic for the show itself, They were nostalgic for what the show represented, a version of food television that respected them enough to explain something real. This corporate pivot away from education toward pure entertainment was not unique to them, as it was happening across all of cable television at exactly the same time. The History Channel stopped being primarily about history, and the Learning Channel gradually became the home of reality programming with nothing to do with learning. Cable networks across the board discovered that competition formats and loud personalities pulled far bigger numbers than educational content, and they all made the exact same call. Food Network was not uniquely cynical. They were simply following a pattern that the entire television industry had already adopted. But here is why the Alton Brown case cuts deeper than the average network pivot. Food Network had a person on staff who was actively, vocally, and publicly warning them about exactly what they were trading away. He was not a passive observer from the outside. He was deep inside the building on their official payroll, saying out loud that the direction they were heading would cost them something real and permanent. They heard him, and they kept going anyway. That is the part that truly stings. It is not the pivot itself, but the fact that the evidence was sitting right there in the form of a man who had spent over a decade proving that intelligent food television could draw a loyal, passionate, long-term audience. The network looked directly at that evidence and deliberately chose short-term ratings instead, optimizing for the immediate financial quarter. You can watch hours of Food Network programming today and come away thoroughly entertained without learning a single functional thing about how food actually works, how heat transfers through a cast iron pan, why bread rises, or what emulsification actually means when you're making a sauce. Good Eats answered all those questions consistently and entertainingly for 14 seasons, and nothing currently on the network even attempts to do the same. Alton Brown's independent career is proof that audiences want to be taught something, provided someone is willing to do the hard work of making that teaching feel like entertainment. Today, he is doing exactly what you would expect from a man who proved he never needed a network's permission to be interesting. His live touring shows continue to draw massive crowds. His online presence is genuinely engaging with his fans, and his classic television library sits on major streaming platforms, where a brand new generation of viewers is discovering it fresh. He has built, piece by piece, a successful career that does not depend on the goodwill of any single corporate platform to survive. In interviews, he has described the immense creative freedom that came from stepping away from the cable television world, using the word relief to describe his independence. That single word matters immensely because it tells you exactly what the years inside that corporate machine actually felt like for him. Alton Brown did not disappear from Food Network. He outgrew it entirely. He chose an audience over a network, craft over a generic format, and the slower, more difficult work of building something that actually belonged to him. The corporate machine kept moving, but the man who left it took the most valuable thing with him: the very reason it ever mattered in the first place. Ultimately, the trajectory of his career serves as a powerful case study for modern media, demonstrating that true authority cannot be manufactured by an executive producer or bought with a high production value budget. While television networks chase fleeting trends and social media algorithms favor instant shock value, the audience retains a deep, unspoken hunger for substance and authenticity. Alton Brown understood this reality better than anyone else in the business because he never viewed his viewers as mere passive consumers or numbers on a spreadsheet. He viewed them as fellow students of the culinary world. By walking away from the flagship channel that made him a household name, he proved that a creator's true value lies not in the platform they occupy, but in the trust they build with the public. Long after the bright lights of modern cooking arenas dim and the manufactured stress of reality showtimers runs out, it is his legacy of thoughtful education that remains relevant. The corporate entity kept the building and the intellectual property rights, but the filmmaker who walked toward food walked away with the only asset that genuinely mattered: the enduring loyalty of a community that wanted to understand their world one ingredient at a time. This path toward complete artistic autonomy reached its logical peak as he fully embraced life as an independent creator, launching multi-city theatrical ventures and publishing reflective collections of essays that spoke directly to his fans. He proved that when an institution loses its core argument, the individual voice can still carry it forward. Rather than fading into the background of a changing media landscape, Brown simply shifted his classroom to interactive stages and digital spaces, where his uncompromising standards were celebrated rather than managed. In the end, his departure did not mark the end of an era for culinary education. It simply marked its relocation. He left a message for future creators that success does not require compromising your vision for corporate approval. True impact is measured by the longevity of the knowledge you leave behind. And by that metric, Alton Brown won the argument completely. The man on the other side. Most people, when they lose a platform that big, spend years trying to get it back. They take meetings, they pitch reboots, they agree to formats they do not believe in just to stay relevant. They make peace with the machine because the alternative, starting over without the infrastructure of a major network behind you, feels too exposed. Alton Brown did not do any of that. What he did instead was quieter, more deliberate, and ultimately far more revealing about who he actually is outside the television persona the public spent 2 decades watching. The touring shows, because that is where the shift became most visible. In 2015, while his Food Network relationship was already cooling, Alton Brown took a live show called Eat Your Science on the Road. It was not a cooking demonstration. It was not a celebrity appearance. It was a full theatrical production. Science experiments, music, food is prepared live on stage, comedy woven through the whole thing. He sold out venues across the country, not small venues, theaters, the kind of spaces that musicians and stand-up comedians fill. He was pulling audiences of 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 people per night, all of whom had bought tickets specifically to spend 2 hours watching Alton Brown do the thing he had always done on television, just without anyone between him and the crowd. The tour ran for years and kept evolving. He updated the material, he added new segments, he brought in guests. Each run was different from the last. That is not the behavior of a man coasting on nostalgia. That is someone actively building something. Then there was the writing. Alton Brown had always been a writer first. The scripts for Good Eats were dense, well-researched, and carefully constructed, setting them apart from virtually everything else in food television. He knew how to put words together with purpose. After his Food Network presence faded, he leaned back into that. He published a book called Everyday Cook in 2016. It was not a standard celebrity cookbook full of glossy photographs and simple weekend recipes. It was opinionated, specific, and written in a voice that sounded exactly like him. Funny in places, blunt in others, genuinely useful throughout. It hit the New York Times bestseller list. That detail is worth pausing on. A cookbook from a man whose television platform had significantly diminished still found a large enough audience to land on one of publishing's most competitive lists. The audience had not gone anywhere. They were just waiting for him to give them something worth showing up for. What does a man do with creative freedom after spending 20 years inside a system that was slowly narrowing what he was allowed to be? The answer, in Alton Brown's case, was that he got stranger, more specific, more himself. His online presence became genuinely unpredictable in the best sense. He posted food content alongside opinions on music, politics, and culture. He engaged directly with fans in a way that cable television never permitted. He did not perform accessibility. He was actually accessible. He started a podcast called Alton Browncast. It ran for multiple seasons and covered food, travel, music, and whatever else was occupying his mind at the time. No network format to adhere to, no time slot to fill, no executive notes on what topics were appropriate for the brand. Just conversations run at whatever length they needed to be. And then there was the personal chapter that ran alongside all of this, largely out of public view. Alton Brown had been married to his college sweetheart, Deanna Brown, for over 20 years. They had a daughter together. In 2015, they divorced. It was not a tabloid event. He did not discuss it extensively in interviews, but it coincided almost exactly with the period when his professional life was undergoing its most significant restructuring. 2 major foundations are shifting simultaneously. That is a heavy thing to carry, regardless of how composed a person appears on camera. By 2018, he had married again. His second wife, Elizabeth Ingram, is an interior designer. People who have followed his social media closely noted the change in his general disposition around that period. He seemed lighter, more willing to be playful, less guarded. Whether personal stability fed professional confidence or vice versa is impossible to say from the outside. But the timing is hard to ignore. The years in which Alton Brown built his most independent, most creatively free body of work lined up directly with the years in which his personal life settled into something that clearly suited him better. By the early 2020s, Alton Brown had become something that very few television personalities ever managed to become. He was more relevant without a major network than most people are with one. His old episodes were being discovered by teenagers on streaming platforms who had never watched Food Network in its peak years. His name was appearing in online food science conversations, cited by home cooks who had built their entire understanding of the kitchen on what they learned from Good Eats. His live shows were still drawing crowds. He had become, in the truest sense, platform independent. When you remove the constraints of corporate oversight, you get a creator who is willing to take genuine risks. You get a writer who published a massive collection of essays titled Food for Thought in 2025, expanding his intellectual footprint beyond simple step-by-step instructions. You get a performer who engineered a massive 60-city farewell tour called Last Bite, traveling across the country to connect intimately with over 500,000 dedicated fans who wanted one last taste of his signature live variety show. Most importantly, you get an instructor who realizes that if the old networks will no longer invest in true education, he can build his own digital infrastructure to deliver it. He took total control of his output, launching a highly produced series called Alton Brown Cooks Food, directly on independent platforms. Millions of home cooks flocked to these videos to watch him update classic methods, prove the value of a proper salt solution, and restore the beloved technical precision that built his career. He did not fade away because he chose to invest in his audience rather than an institution. The machine continued to produce reality competitions and loud food spectacles, but the viewer who truly wanted to understand the science of the kitchen simply changed the channel to find him. Alton Brown survived the corporate transition by outgrowing it, proving that when you possess actual substance, you do not need to ask a television network for permission to exist. Ultimately, Alton Brown's legacy proves that true culinary authority does not require a cable network's stamp of approval. By choosing substance over spectacle and his audience over a corporate machine, he completely redefined what food television could achieve. His journey from filmmaker to culinary educator left a permanent mark on how we understand the kitchen, proving that curiosity and logic will always outlast fleeting entertainment trends. Subscribe today for more in-depth stories, technical guides, and culinary insights delivered straight to you.